I'm Jeremy, and we're here talking about the NFL playoffs, the seedings, some of who's in, who's going to be out. We'll finish it up later with a little bit of college football talk. That's this weekend. That's next weekend. We'll give my thoughts on that, and then towards the end, if we have time and technology cooperates well enough, I'll give you some live betting tips. Last week we tried to do this, had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I'll say last week went 1-3 on the betting picks. Had Chicago, or had the Browns at 3.5. They missed by a half point. You'll have that. We could have been 2-2. Went 1-3 on that. But we're going to start off this podcast and this discussion with the NFC side since Monday Night Football just wrapped up. Seattle pulls off the upset with backup quarterback Drew Lock, leading them to the Eagles losing, going down to 10-4, and losing first place in the NFC East. Now they're tied with Dallas at 10-4. Seattle improves to 7-7, but the mess at the bottom of the NFC, they're still on the outside looking in. Vikings and Rams also at 7-7. We're going to go over this starting right now. Dallas more than likely is going to be the 1 seed. We all know that. Even if they lose at the Ravens, which I don't think they will, I have the Niners winning that. And we'll cover what that means for the Ravens when we get to the AFC side. What I have right now is the Niners are going to be the 1 seed. They're going to have home field advantage. Because after the Ravens, they've got Commanders at the Commanders. That's a mess. Rivera's got one foot out the door. New owners. They don't know what they want to do at quarterback. That's going to be an easy win. And then the very last week, home against the Rams. They'll probably already have the 1 seed locked up. They may rest players. They may not. That will probably bode well for the Rams going into that last week if they can hold on. Now, where things get interesting is that 2 and 3 seed. The South has got the 4 seed locked up. That's another jumbled mess. A lot of 7-7, 6-8 going around at the bottom of the playoffs on the NFC side. Dallas and Philly. Dallas's remaining schedule at Miami. The big game this week, in my opinion. 49ers and Ravens. That's going to be a really good game. Really good matchup of two really good teams. Potential Super Bowl rematch from the Harbaugh Bowl. But this could be a future preview of this year's Super Bowl. Those are two very good teams. The one with the most playoff implication, in my opinion, though, is Dallas at Miami. Dallas coming in at 10-4. Miami coming in trying to stave off the Bills. Sorry about that, folks. Got hair. It's live. It's live. You know how that goes. Miami trying to hold on to the 2 seed as well. But I think Dallas being absolutely embarrassed by Buffalo is going to come out strong. Miami has struggled against physical teams. Last week against the Jets, notwithstanding, which is known as a physical defense, I personally think Dallas is going to roll Miami. They'll try their best. They may get it close there at the end. I just think Dallas is going to come out guns blazing. They got Philadelphia at their heels. They cannot afford to drop it. They can't even afford to look ahead to the next week when they're hosting the Lions, which is also a difficult task. But they have to take care of business at the Dolphins. They got Philadelphia on their heels tied. Dallas has the tiebreakers. They split. I believe it's going off of the conference record at that point. But Philadelphia, they have home against the Giants, home against the Cards, and at the Giants in the very last week. There is no reason, even with their horrible back end, should they lose. If they're going to lose any game, it might be the Cardinals with Kyler Murray trying to come back and prove he needs to stay at Arizona. Something else to watch for, though. Kind of forgotten in all of this is everybody's, the 49ers are 1, Dallas and Philadelphia are fighting for 2. The Lions are 1 again. They beat the brakes off of Denver. Some questionable officiating, but you can say that every week at this point. But the Lions have at the Vikings, starting Nick Mullins, blows that lead to the Bengals. At Dallas, very tricky, and then home again to finish it out with the Vikings. If the Lions beat Dallas, there's a chance they're the 2 seed. And playing at Ford Field is going to be very difficult for any team. But I'm gonna have to see how that goes. Really, the NFC is in the hands of the NFC East, Dallas and Philadelphia, and how their last three go out. Shifting now to the other side of the NFC, the bottom part of the South, that's been kind of a de facto, somebody has to win it because the rules say somebody has to win it. Bad division. I believe this is getting to be a close, this may be week 4 or 5, since any of these teams had a winning record, potentially. They're not good. They all have obvious flaws. The Saints, they're running their team like they expect the NFL to fold in 4 years, and nobody's going to remember that the cap is a thing. The Bucks, who had to pay the piper for that Super Bowl win and the last one with Brady, trying to just re-sign everybody, try to go for 2. They are both tied 7-7. Atlanta doesn't have a quarterback. Heineke tried it, didn't work. Ritter tried it, didn't work. Tried it again, still didn't work. And the Panthers, they could lose to the national championship of the college football team at this point. But here's how the South looks like it's breaking out. Bucks and Saints tied 7-7. Yes, technically Atlanta is in the mix at 6-8. They're done. They're cooked. I don't even have them as in the hunt for the wild card. I think that team is fundamentally broken when it comes to the quarterback. And at this point, if you don't have the quarterback, nothing you can really do. The Buccaneers, their last 3 games are 2 home games, critical home games against the Jaguars this week and then against the Saints next week. And then they finish up at the Panthers. Easy win, unless maybe they throw in the backups if they've got everything locked up. The Saints, however, their 2 road games is at the Rams this week on the Thursday night game, and then at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Rams are hot. They're currently occupying the 7th seed in the wild card. Don't look past the Rams to get in here and do some damage. Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, they've still got Aaron Donald on the back end. Puka Nacua is rocking it right now, and they got Cooper Kupp, who, when last full season he was healthy, was the Triple Crown winner year. Obviously, he gets hurt last year, and that's rough for him. And then the Saints finish home against Atlanta. That may not mean anything, but if the Saints can get past those 2, the last week for both teams is irregardless. If the Saints have to beat Atlanta, they will. If the Bucks have to beat the Panthers, they will. So it really comes down, can the Bucks beat a reeling Jaguars coming off of a bad loss against the Ravens? The Jags need that also. We'll get into some of their scenarios when we hit the AFC side. But right now, we're looking at a 2-horse race for the South. Now, if the Buccaneers can make the playoffs, get that first home field, they will probably be hosting the 2nd place of the NFC East. Whether that's the Eagles or the Cowboys, that's besides the point. What is the point is if the Bucks get in, I think they can make the NFC Championship game. I know that might be a hot take, but we got to look at it by how everything is shaken up. Dallas, they always underplay in the playoffs. Yeah, they beat them last year, but at that point, Brady couldn't throw the ball down the field. There was nothing they could do. He wasn't mobile enough. What do the Bucks have? Mike Evans, future Hall of Fame wide receiver, over 1,000 yards again. They just got done smoking the Packers. Baker puts up almost 400 yards, first ever perfect passer rating by a visiting quarterback in the history of Lambeau Field. You've got a running back that might start being able to emerge, and you've got Todd Bowles as the head coach. He'll be able, in push coming to shove, he can make it hard on people. Now, yes, they have already lost to Philadelphia, but that game was a little bit closer than it had any right to be. And while the Bucks are 7-7, they've been in some close games. Baker, down the stretch in the back half of these games, is performing really well, and that's what you need in the playoffs. It doesn't matter how you start. We saw that last year with Jacksonville and Chargers. If they ended the game at halftime, the Chargers would have been amazing. But you got to play all 4 quarters, and that's where the Bucks and Baker in specific are playing really well in that fourth quarter. I can't take much out of the Saints, though. I know we'll talk about them in the playoffs. Going back to the Saints real quick. I know they beat the Giants, who are coming off a huge win at the Packers. The Giants aren't good. They're not good. That team is rife with turmoil. DeVito was a really neat story, and he'll get backup money somewhere. Or he may just stay with the Giants. But he gets knocked out. They got to put Tyrod Taylor in. They cruise to a 24-6 win there. I can't believe in Derek Carr. Try, and he doesn't do anything. That's the only thing he does is nothing. And the Saints, yes, they might be getting Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, they'll be getting some of the weapons back. I just don't believe Dennis Allen is a good head coach. I don't know why they stuck with him this far. But when it comes to the South, like I said, the Bucks get in, they've got a chance to upset. Because if they can upset whoever the loser of the NFC East is at home, yes, they'll then have to go on the road. And we'll see what breaks out there. But they've got the offensive firepower to keep up with the 49ers. I know that may sound wild, because the 49ers are just steamrolling people. And the only games they've lost is when the Avengers weren't assembled for them. But all you got to have is one bad game. And if you have that one bad game in the playoffs, well, there's no bounce back for the next week. You're done. And that's something I could see happening to the 49ers. They're rolling. One kind of tricky game where they get a counter punch and it goes sideways real quick. But we're going to shift now to the third part of this discussion on the NFC today, the wild cards. We're looking at the Rams, Seattle, and on the bottom side, the Packers. The Saints, we've already talked about them, and the Bucks. They might also somehow be able to get in. I don't see it, because right now the Saints are on the outside looking in the standings, looking up at Seattle. I think whoever loses between those two in the South, they won't make the playoffs unless one of these other teams fall apart. But the Rams, home against the Saints this week, at the New York Giants, at the 49ers in the last week. If the Rams beat the Saints, obviously the Saints are probably out of it in the South, and they're also out of it in the wild card because there's too many tiebreakers going into that. Seattle, coming off a huge win. Drew Lock is a backup quarterback. Amazing last-minute drive and a great pick on that last drive to stop the Eagles in their tracks, get them to 7-7, pole vault the Saints, stay in that 8th spot. They have at the Titans, tricky. Vrabel's a great head coach. They play for pride. Will Levis has a sprained ankle. He will more than likely not play in that game. They'll probably go back to Ryan Tannehill. I haven't looked at their backup situation, but you still got Henry. If Henry's still playing, you got DeAndre Hopkins, maybe Tannehill throwing it around trying to prove he can still start. That could be a very hard spot for Seattle at Tennessee, coming off a huge emotional win on the short week. They could potentially drop that. But if they don't drop that, they end with the Steelers and the Cardinals. The Steelers, once again, the AFC side, we may touch on them a little bit. The Steelers are broken. They're going to have to move off Mike Tomlin. That could be 1 foot out the door kind of a game. But if they can make it past the Titans, they just have to wait and see what happens with the Rams. Because if they can make it past the Steelers and the Titans and beat the Cards, obviously 10-7, that should be good enough. And then finally, on the bottom side is the Packers. Disappointing loss, back-to-back weeks. You should have beat the Giants. You really got blown off your own field by the Bucks. You dropped to 6-8. You were at 6-6, looking really good coming off that big win against Kansas City. But now they have a get-right game, though. They have a get-right game. Packers at the Panthers. Should be a win. Like I said, the Panthers could lose to a college football champion this year, the way they're looking in such turmoil. Bryce Young has regressed horribly, what it even feels like from college. He just is not adapting well, and it could be a coaching issue. Who knows? That thing's a tire fire. Then they go at the Vikings. They're starting Nick Mullins. If you're starting Nick Mullins, I'm not going to pick you to win a game. If you win, cool, but it's Nick Mullins. Probably nothing's going to happen there. And then you end it at home versus the Bears. That could just be playing for pride, playing for positioning. Justin Fields is trying to prove he can still be a starting quarterback. We're not going to get into it this week or maybe even next week, but maybe in a few weeks we'll start talking once it shapes up a little better. The mock draft, where people are drafting, what they should do. Should the Bears keep Justin Fields? Should the Denver keep Russell Wilson? What team should and shouldn't draft? But right now, the way things are looking, the Vikings, even though they are in the wild card, I don't believe in them. You got Nick Mullins. Yeah, you have Justin Jefferson, Kenneth Osborne, and a good young coach. But I just don't think the Vikings having to play the Packers, they'll lose that one. I haven't even written. I have schedules written down here as notes to go off. I don't even think they'll do much. They could have. Now, if they would have beaten the Bengals like they should have, I might have given them some kind of credit. But the defense, once again, letting up too many points. I think the Vikings will be out of it. They're in right now, but I don't think they will become the end of the year in a couple of weeks. So the way you look at it, the wild card, in my opinion, will probably be Eagles or Cowboys. We got to wait. Like I said, this week, huge week for everybody this week. This is really going to determine a lot of seedings going forward and what may or may not happen. Then you have the second place of the NFC East will be the 6th seed and have to go to the winner of the NFC South, much like last year. Then after that, Seattle, and I believe the last two will be Seattle and the Rams. Like I said, I don't think the loser of the South will be able to sneak in. I think the Packers have shot themselves in the foot the past 2 weeks too much to try to hop anybody. Like I said, Atlanta's not doing anything. Vikings will fall off because they've got to play home against the Lions, home against the Packers, and then they have to go back to the Lions. So you got the Lions who are really trying to play for positioning. They've been embarrassed a couple of times. They come off their big win. The Lions are going to be trying to get that 2 seed, make as many games to come through Ford Field as possible. Yeah, I don't see any way the Vikings can sneak into this playoff picture, barring another quarterback injury. There's been a lot of those. That's why Nick Mullins is starting, obviously, because Cousins gets put on IR. So the way I see this whole thing shaking out, 49ers get the 1 seed, they get the bye. Playoffs go through San Francisco. Dallas has the opportunity, in my opinion, to run this table and get the 2 seed, keep Philadelphia at bay, make everything come through Jerry World, and they need that. I don't think Dallas can go on the road and beat hardly anybody. For whatever reason, they are not able to do anything really on the road. The only 2 teams they beat on the road were a couple of tomato cans. They played like the Panthers and the Giants, and that was the time they just beat them 40-0. Anytime the Giants did anything, Dallas just said no. You don't get to do that. So Dallas on the road against potentially real competition, it has not gone their way this year. They've even started admitting that in the press conferences. It's not working. So really, if Dallas has to run this table, the Lions bringing up the 3rd seed right now. If what I think happens and Dallas can run the table, obviously the Lions will go 2-1 down the stretch. They'll secure the 3rd seed. Bucks, in my opinion, get the 4 seed, leaving Eagles, Rams, Seattle somewhere in the bottom. And that'll be it for the NFC side of things. We're going to shift and look over to the AFC side. Let me get my other notes over here. The AFC standings are as follows. The Ravens in first place at 11-3. The Dolphins in second place at 10-4. The Chiefs 9-5. The Jacksonville Jaguars 8-6. Your wild card situation: the Browns at 9-5. The Bengals 8-6. The Colts 8-6. And the only other two teams in the hunt, in my opinion, are the 8-6 Texans and the 8-6 Bills. I understand the Steelers are 7-7, along with the Denver Broncos 7-7. I think it's too little, too late. They had to win their previous weeks to stay in this hunt. I don't think because I don't see Denver being able to get hot enough to get in. And like I said, the Steelers are starting Mason Rudolph on Christmas. Cute, but cute doesn't win you a football game. Alright, we're going to look at the number 1 seed and how this is shaken out. Ravens come off of a huge blowout win, 23-7, over the Jaguars, who really, they probably shouldn't have played Trevor Lawrence. He just had that ankle sprain himself. Tries to play through it. Looked off most of the night. They just couldn't really get a whole lot going. Only put 7 points up on the board. Ravens cruise to another win. Like I said when we were talking about the NFC, Baltimore right now against the 49ers, that's going to be a great game. They're at the 49ers. Lamar has dominated the NFC. I believe he's 13-1 all-time versus the NFC. But if there's going to be an NFC team that's going to handle him fairly well, it's going to be the Niners with just everybody. Offensively, I think they'll be able to take advantage of a Ravens defense. They'll be able to, San Francisco will be able to run on them. I don't see them stopping Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel. And then on the back end, they should be able to keep Lamar as a pocket passer. And that should be a way for them to win. Because I do believe the 49ers, like I said earlier, will defeat the Ravens this week. It'll probably be a good game, don't get me wrong, but I do think 49ers come out on top. And that'll bump the Ravens down to 11-4. Then they're home against the Miami Dolphins. That next week, if the Ravens lose this week, that could be a very, very big game. The Miami Dolphins at the Ravens. That could be huge. And then they finish with the Steelers. They will more than likely beat them if they have to play for seeding. If they don't have to play for seeding and it's backups, who knows? And then we shift to the Dolphins at 10-4, 1 game behind the Ravens. They play Dallas, and then they have to go, obviously, at the Ravens, home against the Bills. 3 really, really hard games, back to back to back. I think Miami is fraudulent 10-4. I really don't think they're all that. I mean, yes, they just got done shutting out the Jets. A good defense, 30-0, but without Tyreek Hill. But I don't know. I've watched the games. I'm not a believer in them. It feels like anytime you can put hands on them, get them a little bit rough, get them physical, get them a little dirty, they can't do anything. They blew that game against the Titans. Really, really poor. And if they have to go to Kansas City, who they've already lost to, or to Baltimore, or even if the wild card, if the Browns come in on the Dolphins on the Vegas side will more than likely be favored because home field, but I think the Browns are the better team. When it comes to defensively stopping the Ravens, I really don't see how the Dolphins are going to be able to do much against the Browns. If that's how it would be to shake out. But that's looking way far down the line. But like I said, right now, Baltimore, I think Baltimore would beat the Dolphins at home. Yeah, it would be. Yeah, the Ravens would beat Baltimore at home, and then the Dolphins will have to finish up home against the Bills. Which, if the Bills can keep winning, that will be for the AFC East title. So, the Dolphins have really rough stretch. They could be limping into the playoffs, losing potentially 2 of 3 or on a 3-game skid. They'll obviously, I do not think mathematically they have clinched a playoff spot, but they have basically made the playoffs. I don't see them dropping all three and dropping all the way out of the playoffs. I don't see that happening. I don't see the wild card teams below them all completely running the table to knock the Dolphins out. But I do think the Dolphins could also potentially fall all the way down to the 3 seed as the Chiefs picked up another win against the New England Patriots in more or less convincing fashion. Sorry about that. Chiefs advanced to 9-5. Their remaining schedule: home against the Raiders, home against the Bengals, at the Chargers, which is basically a third home game but with the sun setting at a different time. I think the Chiefs win out. And they're going to go into the playoffs 12-5, having feeling like they've corrected everything. And honestly, the Jaguars will get into their situation when we do a more deep dive into the AFC South and that dice roll of a division. But the way I see the top of the AFC working out, the Ravens will get the bye. Even if they lose against San Francisco, I don't think they will lose back-to-back against the Dolphins. So I think they'll finish the year 12, 13 wins, and they'll cruise to the 1 seed. The Dolphins, I think they end the year rough. The Chiefs pole vault them for the 2 seed. Won't be directly going through Arrowhead, but we know how the Ravens are in playoffs. The last time they got the bye, if I recall, they got beat pretty bad in the playoffs. Lamar's not a good playoff quarterback as of right now. He has the chance to change it. If there is a year that they can get over the hump, it's got to be this year. With Miami looking like they got a glass jaw, the Chiefs with their issues at wide receiver, and Joe Burrow going down, Rodgers and the Jets going down, so many quarterbacks just going down, and their defense looking so good. And they've just paid Lamar, and they brought in Odell, and they've done all this. They've kind of drafted okay. This has got to be Lamar's year. He could also potentially win MVP for the second time. And what's it going to look like if, once again, Lamar's got a great regular season? They win double-digit games. They get the bye again. They come out, and they still can't make a Super Bowl. Even if they don't win, even if they can make a Super Bowl, I think that would do wonders to change kind of the perception of Lamar in the playoffs. But I can't confidently say that. I've seen them try, but they just can't do it. Lamar either keeps getting hurt, or for whatever reason the playoffs come and he just doesn't show up. He was able to beat the Titans the one time, but outside of that, not a whole lot else. And now we're going to shift to the AFC South. This thing got wonky in a heartbeat. Everybody thought that the Jaguars were running away with it. The Texans had a rookie quarterback. He got super hot, and they were kind of trading back and forth. But then the Colts with Gardner Minshew, they get hot, and all of a sudden that whole division is tied up at 8-6. Pour myself some more water here. Just getting over a little bit of a cold. That's why I got to keep drinking. Last week, when we had their technical difficulties, I had it on the paper. We were going to talk about this. Can the Colts win the division? Because they were a game back, and they had to play the Steelers, which I thought they were going to win, and they do. Could the Colts win the division? Because they were a game behind, and Jacksonville was looking at Baltimore and the Bucs the next 2 weeks. Well, the Colts had the Steelers, a tricky one, but after that it's the reeling Falcons, the Raiders, which we kind of know what the Raiders are, and then the Texans. But here's the deep dive. Here's the rundown. Jacksonville loses at Ravens. They drop to 8-6. Colts winning winning against the Steelers. Pardon me. Also 8-6. The Texans pulling out a nail biter against Tennessee. They advance to 8-6. All 3 teams tied at 8-6. The way it's shaking out right now, Jaguars leads the division with that 8-6 due to tiebreakers. Colts bring up the 7th seed, tied with the Bengals at 8-6, but they are at the 7th seed 8-6, and then the Texans outside looking in 8-6, not in the playoffs. Personally, I think the Texans are going to wind up being out of it. They play a hungry Browns team who's just trying to make sure they keep their momentum, keep going. And they may even be looking at the very outside possibility of the Ravens somehow faltering and the Browns hopping them with the reanimated corpse of Joe Flacco, which would be comedy of the highest order if Joe Flacco for the Browns were to win the AFC North. But that's a long shot. Probably not going to happen. It'd just be kind of funny. Texans at home against the Browns this week. I think they lose that. That Browns defense is excellent. The Texans, once Tank Dell goes down and they're down to just him, Nico Collins, I don't see them doing much. Even if C.J. Stroud comes back, I know he missed this game, and I believe it was Davis Mills. That Browns defense is too good. It's too good, too hot. It'll eat up that offensive line with Myles Garrett and everybody else up there. The offensive line is good. They've got Njoku running absolutely hog wild right now. They'll lose to them. They'll drop to 8-7. They'll probably beat the Titans the next week at 9-7. But last week at the Colts got to have it. I think the Texans limp out of the season. They've just suffered too much injury, too much inexperience. They kind of had their chance, and they weren't able to get it done. Now we look at the top two of this division, in my opinion. The Jaguars, they're reeling. They lose a heartbreaker to the Browns, get embarrassed by the Ravens, and now they're sitting here 8-6 when they were at 8-4 before obviously the 2-game skid. They have to play the Bucks that are hot, the Panthers, which are the Panthers, and then the last week at the Titans. Like I talked about, I believe with the Bucks, I think the Jaguars lose this week, make it 3 in a row. They lose to the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. My apologies. 8-7. The Colts play at the Falcons. They win 9-6. The Colts will jump the Jags this weekend for the playoffs. Now, it is worth noting, in the case of a tie, the Jaguars are going to hold the tiebreaker. They went 2-0 against the Colts. They swept them. So really, it's a half-game difference between the Jags and the Colts. But I think after this weekend, they play at the Falcons. They'll beat them 9-6. Home against the Raiders. Colts, more to play for, more motivated. They'll beat them 10-6. Going into the last week, having a half-game lead on the Jaguars. This is where everything could get messy. Because even though I said the Texans probably are out of it, here's also a scenario. Even if they lose to the Browns, go 8-7, they could win against the Titans next week, go 9-7. Now you're looking at 2 9-7 teams and a 10-6. Colts Texans play each other. Texans win. They are 10-7, and I believe they would sweep the Colts. They have the tiebreaker there. Jacksonville goes in 9-7. The Titans beat them. Obviously, they're 9-8, and they're out. If the Titans could play massive spoiler, and you never really, in my opinion, I don't like betting against Mike Vrabel if all I've got is what's left of a team. He's too good of a coach for that. But honestly, the way I see this shaking out, I think the Colts run down the Jags and win this division. And where the Jaguars wind up in the wild card, they may occupy that 7th or even maybe the 6th seat. I would have to look into a whole bunch of tiebreakers for that because this whole thing is a mess. So that's how I see this working out. Jaguars lose to the Bucks. Colts win. Colts hold on to the division for the rest of the season. Colts, with backup Gardner Minshew, win the division, make the playoffs. Which is astonishing, the fact it feels like a long time ago. It happened so early. Anthony Richardson goes out, goes on IR, has his injury. Minshew comes in, struggles for a little bit, but then finds his footing and takes off. So now, I've got the Browns also as a lock. I haven't bothered really to look up their schedule too terribly much. I don't see them faltering out of the playoffs. Joe Flacco, doing really good right now. He's keeping them on track, keeping them cooking. He threw 3 picks, I believe, against the Bears. They should have probably lost that if Mooney realized you can catch a football on your back. But as we go into that, the Browns will probably occupy that 5 seed, and they'll play the winner of the AFC South. And I think they'll go in and they'll win that. The Browns is a team. If I had to rank who I believe could make a Super Bowl out of the AFC, just sitting with everybody, I'll even include the Texans and the Bills, who are both in the hunt. I think right now my confidence would be Chiefs 1. They've been there. They've done it before. They've proven they can win. Ravens 2. Even though they haven't really proved it too terrible. That defense is excellent. It seems no matter who gets hurt at running back, Gus Edwards is pounding it. He usually gets in for some touchdowns. Lamar's making plays everywhere. You think he got him sacked. Joke's on you. No, you don't. And if I had to pick a third, even if Buffalo gets in and wins the East, I trust the Browns more than I do the Bills. With Flacco at quarterback, he's been in the playoffs before. You have a really good veteran leadership going into that. So right now, if I had to rank my top 3 most confident teams to make a Super Bowl, I really think it would go Chiefs, Ravens, Browns. Which sounds crazy, and I know it's probably being disrespectful to the Dolphins, but December football in Miami don't go together. Playoff cold weather football don't go together. Even if they somehow get a couple home playoff games, they've shown a good defensive team will stop them, will stunt them, and most of the other teams in the playoffs have enough offensive firepower to score if they slow them down. The Chiefs have already beaten them. The Ravens will probably already have beaten them, and I trust that the Browns could go into Miami and beat them if they had to. But yeah, that's how I see things working out on the AFC side. So like I said, to recap, the Ravens probably get the number 1 seed and the bye. Chiefs will jump the Dolphins for the 2 seed. The Dolphins will fall down to the 3 seed. Colts jump the Jags, getting the AFC South and the 4 seed. And then we will sit there and have to work out the wild card. Because at this point, you get into a whole bunch of tiebreakers. You got to look at a lot of conference records. The Bills, they may sneak a wild card if maybe both of the other AFC South teams fall out. They could be a team that could hop into it. The Bengals with Jake Browning, it's a really nice story. And they may take the 7th seed by default. But I don't think you can. I just don't see much there with the Bengals. They're nice. They got enough. I think they have messed their season up all sorts of ways from the get-go by not benching Burrow to start the season so he could get healthy. If they have Burrow in this position, who knows what's going to happen. Without him, and they've got Browning in there, I think they're going to start getting more and more tape on him defense as well, and I think the Bengals are going to start to get shut down towards the end of the year. And if they make the playoffs, I think they're a really good candidate to go 1 and done. And then, like I said, the Texans and the Bills. Bills are too little too late. Well, what are the Bills doing? The Bills are just not. I think they kind of know internally, lame duck coach. I don't see why they would bring back Sean McDermott outside of a Super Bowl appearance. Too much stuff has come out of that locker room with the Bills. We're going to kind of talk, we're shifting to that just a little bit. The Bills, it's just not much there. The offense regress. Yes, they're doing nice right now, but it's kind of a new coach, new scheme. Defenses don't have a lot of tape on what he does and doesn't like to do. The Dallas game, super surprising. Nobody saw that coming. I had one of my picks from last week was Dallas to go in and beat the Bills just straight up. No points, just straight beat them. Dallas looked like the Panthers. They looked like they didn't even belong on a football field. And that was surprising. But I don't think that's the Bills, honestly. Josh Allen doesn't throw a pick or doesn't fumble the ball. he didn't really do much in that game. He got him going early, but he just was able to hand it off to James Cook for most of the rest of the game. I think the Bills will regress back to their mean this season, whether it's dropping the game to the Dolphins in the last week as a typical Bills thing, play yourself up right there and then lose and go out. And they're just too inconsistent. I think they got to go get a new head coach next year and kind of reboot this offense as well as the defense. Yes, they're hurt, but at the same time, Sean McDermott's a defensive coach. Sometimes you just got to figure this out. So that's kind of where we sit, AFC and NFC side. And now we're going to shift a little bit to the college football playoffs. That's in a couple of weeks, but I want to give my opinion on this real quick. Round 1 is Alabama versus Michigan with Washington versus Texas. Right now, the way I see this working out, Washington was a really nice story. They did really good this year. They won it. Texas goes in and beats them. I would love nothing more than a Michigan-Washington national championship. It's going to be Alabama and Texas for the national championship. Nick Saban, John Harbaugh in the playoffs in bowls does not have a stellar record. I think Alabama goes in. They've been there. Michigan may come out tight. All the extra stuff going around is Harbaugh going to leave? Is he going to stay? All this other stuff. And then all of a sudden having to play Alabama, not being able to play the Seminoles, Florida State. I trust Nick Saban more than I do Jim Harbaugh in that situation, and I think Alabama beats Michigan. I think Texas beats Washington, and we have an Alabama-Texas national championship. And from there, not too terribly sure who wins that one. That one could be a toss-up. I believe they played earlier in the season, but it's just, it'll be the last year of one of these things because we're going to go to a 12-team playoff next year for college football. But I think this is the last thing people wanted to see is Alabama in another national championship. It would be refreshing, and I think it would be great for Michigan, Washington, but I just don't see it. I personally think, in my opinion, Florida State should have gotten in over Alabama. I think it was ridiculous they put Alabama in, even though they won the SEC championship. The SEC is not as dominant as they were in previous years. They weren't good out of conference, not as good as they had been. Well, the committee basically said, it doesn't matter if you win all your games. It doesn't matter. I just think it was very poor for them to put in Alabama over Florida State. But those were kind of my quick thoughts about the college football playoffs. And I'm going to look up and we're going to decide about 4 games. There were 4 games I like to choose and bet and give you the sides on. Last week, I had Dallas plus 2.5 against the Bills. Obviously, that loses. They get blown all the way out. I had the Ravens minus 3 against the Jaguars. That works. But like I said, talked about it. The Browns minus 3.5 against the Bears. They win by 3, don't cover. The hook catches us. And I did have the Giants at least covering against the Saints. I didn't think the Saints would be able to do a whole lot, but then they wind up being able to win 24-6. That doesn't hit. So we go 1-3. But we're going to look into this week, and we're going to give you some picks from this week. This week, obviously, take the Buffalo Bills to cover. Yes, it's 10.5 points. Take the Bills to cover, folks. The Chargers are just a sleepwalking nightmare. I don't see them being able to do much of anything. They're just waiting for the season to be over to try to figure out who they can buy on the cheap to coach next year, because they're just a cheap organization. Detroit, another favorite. Take Detroit minus 3. Yes, they're going at Minnesota, but it's indoors. Goff plays great indoors. The Vikings, that defense with Amon-Ra St. Brown coming at them, I don't see Minnesota doing very well. I just see Mullins kind of turning back into the pumpkin like he did at the end of the Bengals game, and I could see Detroit easily winning by 10. I would also take Cleveland plus 2.5. There's our third pick so far. Cleveland plus 2.5. I just don't see. Once again, it's a defense thing. I know it's all about the offense anymore, but right now, as far as I'm concerned, with as many injuries to as many players as we've had this year, a stout defense like the Browns is gonna smother the Texans. And Flacco's been cooking. He threw some of them picks last week, but I I don't know. We get the hook, so even if they win by a field goal, we'll cover. Unlike last week where they get the field goal and we lose by the hook, we get the hook. If you can get it at 2.5, take it. If it's 3, still probably take it. But if it pops up like last week to 3.5, don't touch it. But I do believe Browns plus 2.5. And then for the last one, Tampa Bay plus 1. Just take the Bucks plus 1. They're gonna beat the Jags. I just think that they're sputtering. They're spinning. Tampa Bay goes in, division on the line, securing a win. Especially if the Saints lose to the Rams on Thursday, they know they can take that almost commanding lead. They'll play extra motivated. So there you go. Tampa Bay plus 1. Browns plus 2.5. Detroit minus 3. Buffalo minus 10.5. I don't think the Chargers will, like I said, will belong on that same field. So, all right. That is going to wrap up our first episode. It was a little bit short, but it's our first episode. Trying to kind of get things going, keep everything kind of moving. Next week, we'll do some more recaps of all the games. We're going to relook into all the standings and do a final preview of the college football. Next week, it'll be after Christmas time. You'll be able to open all your presents, maybe put us on. We're going to try to do this on Tuesdays or Wednesdays around lunchtime. Maybe give you something to listen to while you're sitting there waiting for your food to heat up at lunch. It'll work. But like I said, next week we're going to do some more previewing, see how the playoffs shake out, see if I'm right, see if I'm wrong, probably a little bit of both. But until next time, this has been the Fifth Down Podcast. And if you would, subscribe to the channel, give us a like, comment what you like, maybe give us some of your own gambling advice, tell us where we're wrong, see if you agree, and then share it around, share it to people you like, share it to people you don't like. Just share it around, help us grow.